In all of your research, what surprised you the most about Baldwin?
I think actually like how tender he was, which was something that I tried to, capture in the book, because people present him sometimes as this symbol, right? But he was a human being. He had needs.
Yeah.
He had loves. He had disappointments. He had successes. So a huge moment for me was, so you remember the children's book, and then Joran Kazak died in 2005, and there was very little out there in the archives at that point to give me a clue about what the texture of their relationship had been. So in 2018, I went to visit Joran Kazak's wife in Tuscany. Again, I had to go to Tuscany. I had to go back. But she told me she had a lot of the original illustrations and some other documents pertaining to Baldwin and Kazak. So it's a summer, we're in her bedroom, she's strewn out all of these like art catalogs and other things, and she finds an unpublished love poem that Baldwin wrote to him. They had just been in Saturnia, this hot spring. They'd driven in Baldwin's brown Mercedes, had the time there together, and then Baldwin had gone back to St. Paul de Vence, and Joran had gone back to Tuscany. And it was the most remarkable moment. There was a rusty paperclip. It was 7 pages long. She obviously hadn't looked at it in 45 years. It was written in French because Joran couldn't speak English. So we stood there as the sun set over the Tuscan hills, and she translated this 7-page love letter back from French into English for the first time in 45 years. And it was so moving. I want you to read the book, but it's a beautiful love poem that's about kind of waking up and wondering what he's doing, and reading his horoscope and his horoscope. Things that we've all done, but told in his inimitable voice. And it was that tenderness that I was like, actually, wow, this is what I've been looking for the last 20 years, was this love poem. And then I was at the Schomburg archives, and I found the version of it written in English. So that was kind of all a full circle moment, and it wasn't surprising, but it was moving and gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, and it was also for me as a reader, it was really important, and this is going back to something that you said a moment ago about being an outsider, but also being tough, right? So to think about those moments of extraordinary tenderness, and then also, moments like in the context of the March on Washington, or various places in the movement where he is on, many ways on the front lines, but then gets pushed to the side or silenced and stays with it, right? That there's something about, it helps think about him as an organizer in some different ways.
And being strategic and not having a huge ego. I mean, one of the craziest things that I discovered about that period was that he had gone to France right before the March on Washington to kind of write a letter in support of the movement by African Americans abroad. And he brought it back with him, and he was slated to read it at the March on Washington. But for various reasons that we won't go into, that didn't happen. And instead, it was read, not attributed to him.
Right. So it didn't quite
work, it didn't
right?
really make sense. It was read out loud by Burt Lancaster. This is a weird country. This is a very weird country that we live in. And, Baldwin never wrote about that. I never saw him talk about it. I mean, he could have made a whole...
Sure, the whole thing about it. Because there are other folks who talked about the difficulty of the march. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the reason that they didn't just very quickly is some people say it's because of his sexuality. But I think Malcolm X actually got it right. Malcolm said they didn't want him up there because they didn't know what he was going to say. And they also knew, and it's true, that this speech was talking about black liberation globally. Yeah. It wasn't just focused on the US, and they definitely did not want that. They had a very specific agenda that they wanted to pass off that did not involve homosexuals, and it didn't really involve women either that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. The women were not asked to speak. Okay. With the I think this is the message of love that permeates Baldwin's story. What position would be fair to say he take seeing how America has not changed its trajectory since Baldwin left the USA to live abroad, which is always a hard question to answer. What would someone think? But maybe we could, if you have thoughts about how what he did say bears on the present moment.
Yeah, I'm always uncomfortable prognosticating what Baldwin would say, in part because he had an idiosyncratic mind and because he was changing his mind. Not that I think he would have changed his mind towards the right or anything, but it's not for me to say. But what I think we can look at is where he was going late in his career in multiple ways. So one of them is that he was looking at gender in this more interesting and expansive way. He was also, in the evidence of things not seen, which was, people did not like that book about the Atlanta child murders, but
good.
He was writing about something that we are dealing with now, right? Which is, it's going from the kind of invisible man Ellison model of no representation to the saturation of the media cycle with images of black suffering. Elizabeth Alexander has written about this in important ways. So have you. So have many people. But Baldwin was doing that then. He was saying, okay, what's going on with this media coverage that is spectacularizing black suffering? And so now we have that problem writ huge, right? Where black teenagers can see their brothers and sisters being killed. So I think that we can safely assume that Baldwin would have a lot to say about that.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a good one. You retrace Baldwin's steps geographically. How did physically visiting these places affect your understanding of his life and work? You've talked about this some, but maybe, I don't know if there are other examples of,
Sure. I'll preface it by saying, the FBI files that followed Baldwin the FBI was terrible, but they were also, the only good thing about them is that they were very accurate with plane tickets and stuff like that. So that was very helpful. But I'll just tell one quick story about, that I've told before, but I think it bears repeating. When I went to Corsica, no Baldwin scholar had gone there before, and I got a Bob Caro fellowship to do it. So I took my mother with me, and Bob Caro has written that great book, Working, talking about how you have to turn every page and go to every place. So I did that with my mother, and she found the house. She went down to town hall, found the house where he lived for 7 crucial months, right? Where he was sort of right before he considered taking his life and had an epiphany about another country. And he had jumped down from a kind of terrace and gone down to the water and contemplated taking his life. So this was a really big moment, and I felt like I should go there. So we went and knocked on the door. It was a very hot summer, and nobody answered. So we decide to walk down to the water to see that portion of the story. And we look back, and on the terrace that he had jumped down from, there was a woman doing laundry. I'm an intrepid biographer, so I jumped behind a tree. But my mother said, "Bonjour!" And up we went. And the house was virtually unchanged from when he lived there. So it was able to describe. To be honest, that was one of the really enjoyable parts of the book, was being able to describe these places. And to be able to tell Bob Caro, you forgot one thing. Always bring your mother.
That's good. Can you tell that to my children?